This committee of the whole to order. We have committee member Duncan in the chair, McNeil, Smith, and Garnett here in the chambers with me. Committee members O'Keefe, Wainwright, Rintoul, and Fallett are videoing in. I will start the meeting with a territorial acknowledgement. We are on the traditional territories of the WSÁNEĆ people, and I'd just like to say I hope we learn to govern in a good way with their guidance. I will move on now to the approval of the agenda with the addition of two pieces of information with item 9A.
Move adoption.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, that moves unanimously. I will move on to 4A, the approval of the minutes from our previous committee of the whole meeting. There is a recommendation.
I move adoption as presented.
Second.
Can I see a show of hands? All right. That minutes are adopted. I'll move on to presentations, and we have the quarterly policing report with Sergeant Wayne Conley. Mr. Conley.
There we go. Good evening, Mayor and council members and those that are tuning in virtually. A pretty brief report for you this evening, but considering the past few months and what we've been dealing with, I thought it'd be timely to connect on our quarterly report. This quarterly report, for the second report for 2020, has included an additional page on COVID-19 impact to policing from the community. So that's something new for this report, just of interest, if you had a chance to look at that. There have been some noticeable shifts which have resulted in several decreases in calls for service and crime levels in several categories, but also increases in other specific areas as well. I'll touch on that a bit later. Just wanted to share something in addition to that on COVID-19 impacts. Many changes in procedures are being made by Crown Counsel and court services. The courthouse closures that we previously saw, the postponing of first appearance dates for persons charged, the changes in bail hearing procedures, the changes in disclosure reporting for charge recommendations, and revised processes for trials have all resulted in additional workload for our officers and administrative staff. These changes are being adapted to and continue to evolve. There are backlogs in the courts and as well at the detachment. At the present time, the courts have reopened for first appearance dates. Bail hearings are being conducted at the detachment through a conference call telebail process, however, require a full reporting of the evidence available in the first instance. So that requires a lot of immediate attention on a given case to collect the evidence, but also to document all that evidence into a comprehensive report and submit it right in that first instance. Trials are again proceeding, but with new procedures for police and civilian witnesses. The detachment currently has a shortage in administrative support staff, which we are doing our best to deal with, alleviating it by casual support staff that we have, and training in new procedures for admin staff, and where we have skill gaps, it remains a work in progress. So that's kind of an update of what we're dealing with as a detachment. I'll touch base on just a few other things. that I typically would bring Mayor and Council up to speed on. So the detachment is again open to the public for walk-in service. In terms of our resource status, we have one member that is transferring to Squamish, and we have one member that is going on maternity leave at the beginning of next week, I believe. And we have 2 specialized positions that we are being able to fill internally in both community policing, which we have not had filled for several months, and the major crime unit, which will be a backfill to the officer going off on maternity leave. We have new officers being named to transfer into the detachment, one coming from Port McNeill, who actually arrives this week, one from the Lower Mainland, and one from Kamloops. I don't have arrival times because there are house sales and stuff like that in the works to have them transfer in. On the community policing front, it's Constable Paul Middlestead who will assume the community policing school liaison constable role, who replaces Megan Massey, who left back in January. Corporal Carrie Harding conducts weekly rounds with an outreach worker and works with Sydney Bylaw Services as well to assess and support persons with no fixed address or in need of services. Effective August 1st, officers will be conducting early morning park checks on weekends to monitor park bylaw compliance, and that's in line with changes in the bylaw services schedules. The Block Watch program continues to expand and providing crime and fraud prevention information to community members who are engaged with that program. What is interesting is we continue to see a number of internet or Facebook fraud offenses happening in the community, which is an ongoing battle. Citizens on Patrol and Speed Watch programs remain inactive at this time because of the type of programs that they are. And school liaison program with Paul Middlestead will resume when school starts in September. On the crime statistical aspect of the report, I'll just touch base on a couple of things. What we really saw is a very erratic change in statistics, not really surprising, I suppose, but we didn't know what to expect. And so as we look back, and again, this is the period between April 1st to July 1st, so it's right in that period of the beginning of COVID through those initial months. So what we saw was a decrease in, I previously said, a decrease in many categories, but some sharp increases in a couple areas. That being cause disturbance files went up like 186%, and mental health calls were up 11%. A little bit surprised that it's only that. Property crime dropped like 42%, which is significant. And that includes like break and enters, theft from vehicles. Some of those problems that we had a year ago have been less of a problem during this quarter, at least. And impaired driving, impaired driving was way down, 70-some% in Sydney, but not in North Saanich. I have no clue for that. Other than, maybe the local liquor establishments were not active during that period. It's a little bit hard for me to comment because we're into a brand new territory here where there's no real trend to compare with. Accidents were down 21% during that quarter. Calls for service in total were down 18%. Prisoners that we processed were down 32%. What was really interesting is that the number of court-referred investigations, so you think of those declines, but they weren't down. I didn't have the numbers, but they were much the same as we typically have. So we're having more court-related type files. So that's kind of a summary of the status of policing. Kind of brings Mayor and Council up to date, and I don't know if that sparks any questions, but I think that like most organizations, we've been challenged, but managing reasonably well considering all that's been faced.
Thank you, Sergeant Conley. Does anybody have any questions? I see Councillor Fallett first, and then Rintoul, and then Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Staff Sergeant, for that report. It was an interesting read, and in particular, looking through the comments regarding COVID and the increase in mental health calls. And I certainly see from our resident survey that we just had in a couple of weeks ago, that was a predominant feature throughout that survey, as people were commenting on mental health issues, and you certainly corroborated it here from your policing perspective as well. On a sort of a good news story, I also noticed that you've got a new bike registry for stolen bikes, Project 529. Can you comment on that at all?
I knew I should have, as soon as you asked that, checked with Corporal Harding about how that's going. I think it's going more slowly than we thought in terms of the registrations, but we haven't done a lot of media on it. And I think once we get Paul Middlestead into the position, what we'll do is we'll do some media on it, and we'll actually maybe have a bike registration day or something where we actually promote it in a much bigger way. Given some of the other challenges that we've had, we're kind of okay that it didn't just like take off.
Yeah, no, I completely understand, and I respect it. I remember that you and I had talked about it briefly some time ago, and I just went online after I got your report and looked that we've got, of course, bike theft throughout Greater Victoria is absolutely out of the ballpark. And we've got a couple here in Sydney, which certainly isn't alarming by any stretch. And so I noticed that you now have Project 529, which is, I believe it's an international, because it's Canada and US bike registry, but it sort of links all of the police departments together for bicycle theft and makes it far easy to hopefully retrieve your bike if it's found. So I understand and I respect your time limitations on doing a blitz on this to promote the project, but I wanted to give it some airtime right here, and maybe that'll help too.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I know we do have that plan to promote it in a bigger way here. You actually made me think of something else, if I may, that as of August 26th, I should have had this in my notes, but I'm getting forgetful. We're going to be introducing an online reporting program so that the public in Sydney, North Sandwich will be able to actually file a police report for certain types of offenses online. It's just a matter of going onto the RCMP website, and then they can actually file a report, mainly for property crime, so vandalism, thefts of under $5,000 sort of category are some of the main types of offenses that it will allow.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Staff Sergeant Conley, to you for your work and to your team for their work throughout what's been a very challenging period. I have no doubt that you've got some tired people who've done a fantastic job in our community. So appreciation to you and to your team members. I wanted to ask. You spoke about this being, some real ups and downs in terms of this period. And although the actual numbers in some cases aren't very high, the percentages leap out at you. If you look at cause disturbance up 100 and looks like 84%, cannabis controlled substance up 200%, uttering threats up 400%. Would you attribute those particular areas to just sort of an increased transient population during this reporting period? Is that one explanation?
I think what I could say with a fair bit of confidence is that the disturbance and mental health calls are attributed to that. As for the other categories, I think we just saw an overall decline in activities, in all activities, traffic, people being around. So it just was more en masse. We just saw these trends that are different than anything we've seen before. But those couple of categories really were the opposite of that. And I think I didn't look at shoplifting, but so for Sydney, shoplifting is showing down as well for the last bit. But we actually had a couple of weeks where it was way up. So that, as I remember sitting down at a meeting, and we talked about, wow, like this past week was crazy for shoplifting in Sydney. We had so many different offenses. So very, very erratic in those areas. And I don't know that I can really indicate why beyond that. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you for your comments.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Conley, for your report. And now, having heard that your staffing issues, I just had something that I've noticed in the community. I think there's a lot more bicycling going on in our community, in and among our streets. And I'm wondering if there's any possibility in the future, once you're up to manpower, that we could maybe have some kind of a safety campaign. Because what I'm seeing is a lot of people are inexperienced and they don't seem to know the rules and the responsibilities of riding a bicycle on the street. So I have a fear of a serious injury or even worse based on what I've been seeing daily. So I wonder if you could maybe speak to that.
Well, I'm always open to feedback from the community because that's how we sort of get focused on things that maybe people are recognizing. So I appreciate the feedback. I would agree with you. I think it's summer and the weather's been decent over the last while, and there is lots of pedestrian and cycling activity. I have always sort of maintained, I think, being pretty familiar with the community, that our highest risk for serious injury accidents in our community is for the pedestrian vehicle or cyclist vehicle type of accidents. And I was reviewing one today actually that had happened a while ago, and it had come to my attention because of some sort of lawsuit thing that was happening over it, and it made me reflect on the very comment that you're making. Yeah. So one of the things that we can do is, as we get a traffic officer in place, is put some, and I'm hopeful for that in the next few months, put some energy into and we don't have to wait till then actually, but just put some energy into the education piece around that. And sometimes that's just being out and about, but yeah, we see, I think we all see when I'm not in the police car, but you're driving around, you see some scary things happening with pedestrians, and even not wearing helmets and things like that, which are really concerning. So thank you for the feedback, and we'll take that and we'll look at how we might do some stuff on that.
If I may, just want to make a brief comment, sort of piggybacking on what committee member Councillor Rintoul had mentioned. We're in unprecedented and challenging times, both from a pandemic perspective as well as societally. And I just wanted to bring along my respect, support, and appreciation for all the sacrifices and efforts that yourself and your members of your detachment have done in providing a really good service and policing in our community. So thank you.
Thank you,
Madam Chair.
and I will convey that to our members, because I think it's important for them to hear that appreciation.
Oh, Committee Member O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few things that have sort of been touched on. So yeah, excellent report. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Conley. In regards to the mental health issues that you mentioned, of the increase in that, I'm wondering whether you feel that you have or the community has the appropriate resources to deal with those when they come up. And I recognize that, mental health issues that could, there's a wide spectrum there. So just any comments you have on the seriousness of these things, and whether you feel we have the resources to deal with them in our community.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. What we have, just as a starting point, is we have a team available for our support that this town of Sydney supports financially. So it's an integrated mental health team, and it's comprised of police officers and Island Health and counselor trained people that specialize in this area. And so when we use them anytime we get dealing with a situation where some expertise, some assessment is really important, that we don't either under-respond or over-respond to a situation with mental health. And it is really challenging. Yeah, we face lots of different circumstances, from young people to very, very aged people who are experiencing these mental health situations, and we're having to maybe deal with a crisis that's happening. The primary tool that the police have is it's under the Mental Health Act, and it is to bring them to the Royal Jubilee Hospital for assessment if they feel that person is a harm or a danger to themselves or someone else. So where we see that happening, that's the mechanism that comes into play. As I mentioned, we also work with a ministry person that comes out every Wednesday, where we're doing some connections with some of our marginalized folks in the community. But that's not a specialty for mental health. So I would say that, the resources that we have sort of meet most needs for crisis, but if you dig deeper into the situation, there are probably lots of people experiencing mental health problems that it's not really getting addressed for one reason or another. And I mean, if I can be so candid as to say, there was an individual that was spending time close to the town hall, and that was partially because of a mental health challenge, I believe.
Thank you very much for that. encouraging to hear that that you have that team together, because I don't know that that's a common thing in a lot of other jurisdictions. So applaud you for taking that approach. Just two more things. The other thing was about the controlled substances again, and it wasn't a lot, just under the cannabis, and it kind of surprised me because now that it's legal and available, it sort of surprised me that there would be anything there at all. Can you give a little bit more information about the nature of those sorts of offenses?
Well, there are offenses under the provincial legislation. So that has to do with, the packaging or transporting or the quantity or the age of a person in possession. So while we talk about cannabis, being legal, it's legal, but there are still many offenses under the cannabis legislation on the provincial level. So we see, if we were to compare the statistics for, seizures for possession of an illegal substance and compared that to 2 or 3 years ago, it's like a huge difference because we just don't make those kind of seizures anymore. They're not illegal in a lot of those situations. I think if I can say this, that what's happening now, and I think it's somewhat in the news, is the movement towards cannabis or possession, not just cannabis, but possession of illegal substances at this point becoming legalized and focusing on a more of a treatment perspective. And I think even the Canadian Police Association is supporting that focus, from what I understand. So, yeah, we still do encounter some, to summarize, some small number of offenses, but not very many.
Okay, and thank you for that. And then the last thing, just jumping on board something committee member Garnett mentioned about the cycling safety campaign. And I think that's a good idea. I know that, in the past, there's been bike rodeos for kids where they learn bike safety and that sort of thing. And I think kids kind of lately get more educated on this sort of thing than adults do. And so with more adults, taking up cycling and maybe later in life, they're maybe not as attuned to sort of the rules of cycling as they should be. And also, I see a fair amount of conflict between drivers of vehicles and cyclists as well. So some education also of drivers and how to, interact with cyclists and giving them the appropriate, distance and respect on the road as well. So just a comment on that.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
I will now go to Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Connolly, for the report. Most of my questions were answered with the additional information, including the additional COVID-19 impact page. Just want to add from my colleagues the expression of appreciation for the work you and your members do in our community as first responders in a very unique way for the safety of our community. We're now 6 months in to the pandemic, and we know we have months ahead of us, and we appreciate the adaptation, and we'll all continue to adapt. Pleased to see that you have a member now in the community policing role. Always thought that's very important for our schools, for our business community, for the residents at large. A question is you mentioned the Block Watch program, and understandably it's on pause a bit given the circumstances. But in thinking about the future resiliency of our community, do you see an opportunity, or have there been discussions amongst the Block Watch leaders that we might connect Block Watch to emergency preparedness in terms of becoming more resilient in the future?
So I've had that question posed to me, Mayor, from our partners in the fire department and who are, leading the emergency preparedness stuff. And I had to do a little bit of research, and what I found was, and I think we maybe have found some common ground, but the Block Watch Society is a provincial program, and it's got some very strict guidelines around the use of the program for the exclusive purposes of which it was entitled. So I haven't read all of it, but it really does sort of limit the way that we use Block Watch for other purposes. So anyway, I have talked with Donna at the fire department about how we can maybe move forward with what they have, which is a great approach for the community. It's just Block Watch is going to be challenging to use for that.
No, I appreciate the considerations that have been given, and I know we're going to look in many ways to become more resilient in the future.
Yeah.
So thank you
Thank
again.
you.
I guess if there's no further comments from anyone else, I'll take my chance here to just say thank you. It was interesting to see the way, as you said, stats moved all over the place, and I appreciate the erratic year you have probably had, and that you're hanging in there. I just wanted to say there was two things that I went looking for due to a lot of the media speculation about how COVID-19 was affecting people, which was the domestic violence, and I saw that Sydney's was down. It did not go up due to COVID-19, which was good to see because there'd been a lot of speculation in the media that could become a problem as people become unemployed and were trapped at home. So I also noticed our excessive speed was up 1,100%, which I think probably surprised no one who ventured out on the roads during certain times. In perspective, it went from 1 ticket to 12, but still I thought that was an interesting observation that lined up with public sentiment at the time. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, that little statistic escaped me, so good eyes. I'll have to have a look at that. Thank you very much. Yeah, have a good meeting.
All right, we'll now move on to item 6A, which is the budget variance report. And there is a recommendation from the report. Mr. Hisik, are you going to comment on this one, or?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to introduce the report, if I may.
Go ahead.
So this is the first of our regular quarterly reports to Council. You're all familiar with the format and the content by now, having experienced quite a number of these by now. What is unique this year, obviously, is the COVID-19 pandemic and the impacts it's had on town operations to date. And it's too early, I believe, in the situation to determine the ultimate impact for this year. A lot will depend on the next few months and whether we do see a recurrence of what we experienced back in the spring. What I've tried to do in this report, in addition to the usual discussion of operating and capital areas, is at the back of the report, I tried to summarize some of the COVID impacts that staff are aware of and would like to bring to your attention. So I'm not going to get into any of the operating and capital areas specifically until Council has any questions about any particular item, but I would like to highlight the COVID section. So generally, there are no areas of major concern at this time in the operating or capital budget. It's anticipated that the $350,000 in surplus funding that we use to balance the budget and minimize the tax increase is not going to be drawn upon. However, the additional $550,000 that we used to reduce the tax impact for this year, we do anticipate that we'll dip into that to balance our budgets a little bit. The exact magnitude at this time is hard to predict, but I would say probably a majority of that number will be required. That should still leave us in a positive position with respect to our policy about surplus levels. In terms of COVID, the biggest impact has been more of an interruption on our workflow more than a cancellation of anything. There were significant additional demands placed on staff, but I'm proud to say that we pivoted very quickly to adapt to these new conditions and at the same time keep the work plans flowing in the positive direction. So while some things might be delayed, we do expect to get to the vast majority of our projects on the books this year, with a few exceptions, which I'll outline. So at this time, we're not recommending any projects for cancellation. Some, as I mentioned, will be delayed, but nothing jumps out at us as no longer being required or being superfluous and needing to be canceled. Council should note that even in a typical year, not all of our projects are expected to be completed. We have very ambitious plans at the best of times. The goal is that we at least get a project well underway with potential completion the following year. And this year is no different. What is different this year is that it's somewhat hard to tell whether it's a COVID impact or just natural workflow issues. But it doesn't matter. The end result is that there are some delays and some projects will be partially at least carried forward to 2021. In terms of capital projects that may or will be delayed, we've got the Bevan Fishing Pier metal painting. We'll get that going, but we don't anticipate the work to happen this year. Resthaven bike lanes, again, we'll get going on the design and consultation, but that was scheduled for 2021 construction, and that at this point is looking ambitious, but it's too early to tell for sure. Same goes for the bike path on the west side of the highway, the phase 2 of that project. We will begin on design hopefully, and if at all possible, we'll have it ready for construction in 2021. Patricia Place storm and sanitary sewers, likewise, the design and tendering of that work was delayed by COVID because of the specialized nature of the consulting work required. We couldn't get the consultant over from the mainland, but it will be designed and hopefully, if not begun late this year, then constructed next year. Lochside water main, we're scheduled to design this year and construct next year. Again, that could be pushed 1 year in the future on both counts. And ferry terminal building improvements, while we will complete the design, it just does not make sense for us to undertake construction until we have more certainty about the future of the tourism sector. On the operating side, some supplemental items and other operating initiatives. The civic site analysis, we just have had no time to devote to fleshing that out. It's possible we'll begin near the end of this year, but it will continue into 2021 and likely 2022. The Beacon Wharf replacement options have been delayed somewhat, but we're getting going with that new select committee very soon. Beacon West traffic study, it did take longer than anticipated to select a consultant because of the sheer volume of bids we received. It's a reflection of the lack of work out there during COVID that we got, I believe, 11 bids on that, which is highly unusual. And it took longer to get through them, get them through our funding partners, the VAA and North Saanich, and bring them to council. But that is expected to be completed by the end of this year. Some of the parks planning initiatives, we have to do more planning on to support the parks master plan and identifying additional projects for future years. That's been delayed, but will continue soon. I've put together a bit of a watch list for some of the items discussed in the report where we believe there might be COVID-related concerns, but we're not quite sure yet. So what we'll be monitoring for the rest of this year are property tax collection rates. So we're already at 88.6% of collection with the with the commercial class still to come in, their deadline is not until the end of September. I don't really anticipate issues there, but until the funds are received, I can't say for sure. Driver services revenues are lagging behind. Building permit revenues, on the other hand, are well ahead of where we expected to be. The one question remains is how much will be deferred at year end for incomplete work. Bylaw enforcement costs. The bylaw is one area that has been severely impacted in terms of additional duties through COVID, and that continues to this day, even though some of the duties are now off the plate, some continue to be ongoing. EOC expense recoveries, we do anticipate recovering the vast majority of EOC costs as we've been getting approvals as we go. But until we receive the funds in our bank account, again, I'm being conservative and not recognizing those. We have seen additional cleaning, disinfecting, and inspection of public facilities, and that will continue, although maybe not to the degree we had earlier. And we'll be looking at potential new impacts on our capital plan that have not yet surfaced, but still may through the rest of this year. In terms of looking ahead to future year projects, so some of this year's delays in capital projects will clearly require additional effort next year, which will have a cumulative effect going forward as the additional workload impact will carry forward through each subsequent year. While we are not identifying any specific projects at this time for cancellation or deferral, we're still only 7 months into the year and a lot can happen, and perhaps by the third quarter report we might have new information. And also the strategic planning that Council will be undertaking in September, every time that happens between there and the next financial plan, we always review all of our projects before we bring it forward to Council in the new year. So the important message at this time is that our work plans tend to be extremely ambitious, and that's on an ongoing basis, not just this year. And it's simply not possible to keep adding to them without deferring some of what's in our current plans. And that's perhaps a message for September and beyond. Questions might arise when we've been asked to look at our expenditure side, why we're not canceling projects in our budget to save money. And the most concise answer to that is most of our projects are funded from non-tax sources. Therefore, we've got the money set aside in reserves to do them. So canceling those at this time will have no near-term impact on taxes. Much of what we do fund from current year's taxes is ongoing projects or minor works that really wouldn't have a significant impact either way. So while we could look in the longer term at the cancellation of reserve-funded projects, which might then lead to a reduction in the amount that we need to set aside for future use, it's important to realize that we might still be somewhat short of putting aside enough money to meet our future needs. So at this time, it would be difficult for me to recommend that we do that. We're going to keep working away at what that right level is, and obviously with the impacts of COVID and the demands for looking at our infrastructure, that could potentially increase, not decrease. So if COVID persists for another year, or at least through the end of this year, clearly some financial choices will have to be made to lessen the burden on our commercial and residential taxpayers. But at this time, I think it's more of a wait-and-see approach. We've got this year's taxes set. Most of them are collected. And we're doing our best to meet the mandate that our financial plan gave us to support Council's strategic plan. And just want to address the sentiment of building back better, despite the fact that nothing has been physically compromised through COVID. We see that not as rebuilding something that's fallen down, but developing long-term plans for building better infrastructure that could withstand the kind of demands that are that we're seeing now in terms of physical distancing and so on. But that concept, as I mentioned earlier, will require more funding and not less. So it'll be a balancing act between trying to meet those demands and trying to keep the financial impacts under control. And that kind of planning is an exercise that will take years, not months, and will require public consultation to put into place. So with that, I open it up to questions about specific items.
Thank you for that report, Mr. Hisik. Does anybody have questions? Is it Mr. Garnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
O'Keefe?
Thank you. A comment and then a question. The 88.6% of the people that have paid their property taxes, I just want to say a thank you to the residents of Sydney. That's a great job and very much appreciated. The question I have is just because I wasn't aware of this. When I was looking under the one about the recovery of from EMBC of funds, I was quite surprised to see that the installation of the COVID distancing and safety barriers at Town Hall wouldn't be eligible. Is there a reason why they don't deem that as something that's important enough to be reimbursed?
My understanding is that they do not reimburse what are considered capital items. They're paying for a lot of the operating impacts, but that's seen as a longer-term measure. It's something that'll be in place for a while. And we did go back to them twice on it and got the same answer, so I'm not holding out hope.
Great, thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just comments, first of all. Good, for people who don't to get the chance to read through the whole thing, things that jumped out at me is that, our revenues are almost right on target for what staff expected. Investment revenues as well, taxes. So staff have done a good job at that. I also agree with staff's comments about canceling projects or, making cuts to services to save money. And I think, some of the things we need to think about is, first of all, we seem to be right now in a fairly healthy financial position. We're fortunate that despite the pandemic, majority of our citizens were able to pay their taxes on time. Our revenues are good. So we're not suffering like we see some other larger municipalities suffering. And also, I think continuing to support and move forward with these projects is probably one of the best ways that we can help our economy recover. So as Mr. Hisik mentioned, the number of bids that we got on that contract, there's a lot of need out there for these sort of projects to provide jobs and employment for people, keep money flowing. So I think it makes sense to move forward with those. One area of concern that I had, and staff noted it as well, was with bylaw enforcement and the amount of time that our bylaw officers are having to attend to complaints that we get from businesses that are perhaps not following safe, COVID-safe procedures. And I'm not sure what to do about that. I mean, I did have some correspondence with staff today about, if our bylaw enforcement officers are, this is taking them away from other things that we want them to do in the town. Can we not just refer them directly to Island Health or to WorkSafe? And we could. Although what I experienced today is, so I went online and I looked at what's the number to call to Island Health. So I called Island Health. Island Health, said I should call the BC COVID hotline. So I called the BC COVID hotline. They referred me back to local bylaw enforcement officer. They referred me back to Island Health. And they also suggested I could call the RCMP. And I said, well, what would the RCMP do? And they were uncertain, but that was on their checklist of things to tell people. So then I talked to WorkSafe. They also sent me back to Island Health and to bylaw enforcement. And I explained to the person on the phone this roundabout circle that I was being put through. So they put me through to an officer, a WorkSafe officer. And he shed some interesting perspective on this. And he said, my experience was very common. So he said, this is what a lot of people are experiencing. And there doesn't seem to be a common understanding or agreement between the provincial government, Island Health, WorkSafe, and then our local bylaw officers. He mentioned to me that he believed that there was a meeting that took place in the last week or so between Island Health, the health authorities, and WorkSafe and the provincial government. And they were looking at, as he said, to get their act together in these sort of things. So it puts our bylaw officers in a difficult position. Even if we do refer people to Island Health and WorkSafe, they're going to end up back in our lap. So I'm wondering whether it might be useful to pass this information along to our local MLA to let him know that the impact that this is having on our resources, it's not something that we get funding from the provincial government, but it's taking our staff away from other things. So I'm wondering if staff think that might be one option that we could consider in regards to contacting our MLA.
Mr. Humble.
Yeah. Through Madam Chair to Councillor O'Keefe, I think it's certainly an option to consider. It's important to note too that the response by the municipality in terms of bylaw enforcement evolved out of a provincial request or order that was made to municipalities to look to their bylaw enforcement officer to be directly engaged in not enforcement, but providing advice and assisting business with respect to their own plans and approaches to COVID. So indeed, that's what municipalities are doing. So it's a vestige, I think, of the earlier initial response plans that or response recommendations that were made by the province. So municipalities are continuing to undertake that provincial request and act upon that, and quite frankly, I think until local governments hear differently from the province, or local governments hear differently from their respective councils, should we be moving in a different direction, I think it's incumbent upon us to continue that approach. And we've also heard Councillor O'Keefe clearly expressed the challenges and the circuitous sort of route that she was taking when making calls to the different agencies. We've heard similar things as well at the municipal level. So, in terms of contacting the province, our local MLA, etc., that might indeed be an approach to consider.
Thank you for that, Mr. Humble. I think now is a good time to consider that. I was, I think most of us were fully on board when this first, the pandemic erupted. Our bylaw officers did a superb job of getting out there to provide guidance to our local businesses and educate them on safe business practices. And I think, and other staff as well. So I think municipalities have done a good job on that. And now as things sort of transition into, we've done the education in some cases several times to some businesses, and other things on our plate, priorities for us are being compromised. I think now is a good time to at least let our MLA know how this is impacting us. And, if they want us to continue to do enforcement, show us the money and provide us with some authorization to levy fines or whatever. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, I will, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments on the thank you for the very detailed report to staff that were involved. It's very helpful, particularly as we go into our strategic planning in the early fall. I just want to touch on a couple of things in the general operating. One is to echo the thank yous that have already been given to both residents and businesses who have paid their taxes on time or close to on time with the extensions that we provided. It makes a difference for the cash flow at the town and means we don't have to take a look at other measures that the province made available to us, such as having to finance ourselves through reserves or other means. So express that appreciation there. The other is with regards to the note with regards to the protective or the emergency measures function and the $324,000 in COVID-related expenses, and that the majority of those expenses have been pre-approved for reimbursement from Emergency Management BC. Two things to note. One is I think that's an indication, along with the $50,000 budget that Council approved for COVID-related expenses, that it shows in some way the significance of the Emergency Operations Center operations that we had in our community, which were very significant over nearly 15 weeks. And second, I think we should be grateful for the emergency planning that has happened at all levels of government through to the province and Emergency Management BC, such that this funding mechanism can be in place as soon as an emergency is declared, and local governments can have the comfort of being able to take immediate response for their particular communities. So just a couple of those notes on the operating side. On the capital side, our capital budget is very significant. Ambitious has been used a number of times, and I think Council appreciates that. There was 103 projects totaling $10.1 million in the capital plan we approved earlier this year. And we've had a very good accounting through this report of where the vast majority of the projects, certainly all of the larger projects stand. And as I indicated earlier, that will be helpful to us going into our budget deliberations. So thank you again to staff and also for highlighting the COVID impacts as best they were known and the considerations we need to give going forward.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just before we leave this item, just going back to the bylaw enforcement issue, and I'm wondering if staff seem to be in agreement. I think that perhaps a letter to the MLA might be appropriate. And if so, do they require a motion from us to do that, or is that something they can just do?
If I could.
Mr. McNeil. Okay. Mr.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that I think if that is deemed a desirable approach by council, yeah, my perspective is given the nature of a letter like that, it might be helpful to have a resolution to that effect.
Mr. Mayor?
Would that be tonight, or would that be for a next council meeting then, in terms of process?
Mr. Mayor, you were going to speak? Go ahead.
No, I think a resolution would certainly be fine this evening. I will commit, having heard from council and sharing in the concerns that we've become aware of recently, to contact our MLA. We do have fairly regular meetings, and I would can certainly do that by letter or by verbal correspondence and ask for a response back to council.
So shall I, would you like me to make a motion, Mr. Mayor, or are you happy to just proceed?
I commit to doing it. If council wishes to pass a motion for the record, that's I go with the will of council.
Okay, well, I'll make a motion that a letter be drafted from mayor and council to our local MLA outlining the impacts that COVID-19 has had on our bylaw enforcement.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Okay. Councillor Fallett, were you trying to second, or did you have a comment?
Trying to second. Thank you.
All right, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay. I see there is a recommendation, so I will look for a motion.
I move receipt for information.
Second.
Call the question. Can I see a show of hands in favor? I'll get used to this eventually. Sorry, missed that button. I will move along on the agenda. There we have no parks and infrastructure items, no protective services. We are next on development and planning. We have item 9A, cannabis retail store referral for Happy Buddha Cannabis at 2410 Beacon Avenue. I'm going to let staff introduce this one before the proponent speaks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this item is for a revised referral from the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch for a cannabis retail store license at 2410 Beacon Avenue, doing business as Happy Buddha Cannabis. So the town first received a complete application and referral from the LCRB on October 4th, 2019, and we did receive a revised storefront proposal on July 10th, 2020. Compared to the initial submission back in October 2019, there isn't too much different with this revised proposal. One of the items that has changed is the proposed hours of service for the cannabis retail store. The hours from Monday to Saturday have been reduced by 2 hours, the closing time, sorry. So the Monday to Wednesday hours are 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Thursday to Saturday hours are 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and the Sunday hours are unchanged from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. So when staff receive an application that's complete of this type, we have a liquor and cannabis licensing policy that we work through. It's got some specific criteria that we analyze the application against, and so I'll just run through a couple of those categories and subcategories that we look at when we look at an application like this. So the first is location, and subsection A under location is council will only review applications for properties where cannabis retail is listed as a permitted use. And this location does indeed have cannabis retail as a permitted use in the zoning bylaw, so that's no problem there. Subsection B is that council will consider the impact of the cannabis retailer on other uses within 100 meters, such as cannabis retailers, liquor stores, childcare facilities, daycares, educational facilities, libraries, and so on and so forth, family-oriented facilities, etc. So there are two uses within 100 meters that meet this criteria. The first is Lulu's Daycare, which is approximately 100 meters away, just around the corner on 4th Street. And as well, there's the Sydney Museum, which is across Beacon Avenue and a little bit to the east, about 40 meters down the street. So based on the location of these two uses, staff didn't feel that there was any significant overlap. They're far enough away that there's no sort of direct line of sight across the street. So we didn't have any concerns on that point. Subsection C is one cannabis retailer permitted per lot. This is the only cannabis application that Sydney has had, so that's obviously not an issue. Section 2 of the policy is store building facade and treatment, and subsection A speaks to the cannabis retail store being consistent with other retail stores in the area. This is a typical retail unit for Beacon Avenue. It's really not much different. It's a typical size, so there's no concerns on that point. Subsection B is that the proposed retail store will present an attractive, pedestrian-friendly face to the street, providing multiple points of visual interaction through doorways, clear windows, and other pedestrian-oriented features that promote activity and transparency. And if the committee remembers, this was a sticking point on the last version of this application. However, with the LCRB's release of Policy Directive 2015 this year, which changed their approach to cannabis retail storefronts from non-transparent windows to allowing transparent windows. The applicant has submitted a revised storefront, as you can see, that does include transparent windows, and staff feel meets the intent of this policy. So there's no concerns any longer from that perspective. Subsection C is an additional or alteration to the existing storefront, should meet the applicable development permit area guidelines. There is no additional alteration being proposed. And subsection D is that signs should be integrated into the design of the building facade, and so on and so forth. There is not really, it's a typical signage proposal that we'd see with any other retail store, so staff have no concerns there. The signage does meet the requirements of the sign bylaw as well. The third section is on community impact, and subsection A of that section speaks to whether or not the proposed cannabis retail store complements or improves conditions existing in the surrounding area. So staff did a bit of analysis on this point, and we found that there are 62 commercial units or properties and 161 residential units or properties within that 100-meter radius. There are no residential units within the building itself where the use is being proposed, but there are 12 residential units that have sort of a direct line of sight to the proposed location. And those are directly across the street on the south side of Beacon Avenue, 3 in one building, 9 in another. Not all of those 12 units have a direct line of sight out windows to the store, but they are in a building that has a direct line of sight. So it may be fewer than 12 units that have that direct line of sight through a window or something, but no more than that. The other 149 units are located within that 100-meter radius, but don't have a direct line of sight to the front of the store, so they're on side streets like 3rd or 4th. And there are another 75 residential units that are currently under construction within that radius as well. In one case, just over half of the units are in a building directly beside the proposed location. After staff has done, on numerous occasions, staff has observed other cannabis retail stores in the capital region, and based on what we've seen there, we don't foresee any significant difference in terms of how the property is used. What we've observed in other locations is that customers go into the store, buy some product, leave the store, typical to almost any retail use you can think of. And we don't see that changing in this location, or the way the building is used currently in terms of the commercial units there. Essentially, we don't see, in terms of how the entrances and the exits and the activity around the commercial unit is used, we don't see foresee any significant difference there. Subsection B of community impact is that council will consider input from property owners or occupiers of land within 100 meters of the proposed cannabis retail store, as well as input from community members at large. So this is something that, as you know, committee, the court has requested that the town undertake, which is to gather the views of residents. And the town's liquor and cannabis licensing policy does provide a specific method to gather these views. And I've got them bulleted in the staff report there, and I'll just read them out. So 2 advertisements in consecutive issues of the Peninsula News Review. So we'll put an ad in the paper, 2 issues of the paper, pardon me, of a sufficient size that it's noticeable. Second bullet is notice is mailed to all property owners and occupants within 100 meters of the property. So everyone on our property register within that radius will get a letter advising them of what's happening and asking for comments. And the third is an opportunity for the public to speak at a council meeting, so a special public participation opportunity. In addition to this, staff felt that a sign placed in the proposed location storefront would be beneficial given its location and the number of passerbys that are expected in that location, and that would obviously raise the profile of this request for comment from the community and probably be beneficial in terms of getting a broad range of feedback. So there are staff recommendations to this effect at the end of the report. The sign to be placed in the storefront would also follow our typical signage required in the land use procedures bylaw. Subsection 3 in this section is that council will consider referral response and feedback from the local RCMP detachment. We did refer it out to them again, and again, they had no significant comments or concerns on the application. And subsection D is that council will take into account any specific measures identified by the applicant to minimize or prevent negative community impacts, such as but not limited to service to minors, minimizing odors, preventing smoking, property maintenance, beautification programs to prevent unsightliness, etc. The applicant's proposal does speak to a number of these issues, and the LCRB's approach to a number of these items, such as service to minors, is very strict, and they are on top of it significantly, as with liquor. So staff have no concerns in this area as well, based on the applicant's submission. The final section that we considered is safety and security, and so that speaks to the outside design of the storefront, the back of the store, and looks at how they used these crime prevention through environmental design principles in how they've approached the exterior of the store. And certainly there are some specific items addressing that in the applicant's submission, and staff have no concerns in that regard either. And that's it for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I will move on to Ms. Pendergast, who is calling in via Zoom to give her presentation. Thank you.
Cindy, you're muted.
Thank you, Peter. Brad's actually going to introduce us, so Brad, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council, and staff. Thank you very much for your time tonight. We do appreciate it. I'm Brad Stiles, co-founder of Happy Buddha. There have been a lot of changes since we saw you October 28th. Lots going on in the world. Obviously, COVID-19 has impacted the majority of the world, including Sydney, and it's really close to home. Secondly, the LCRB has removed the opaque window requirement for cannabis retailers, so that's a big change as well. But getting back to COVID-19, obviously it's been very devastating. And we may see a second wave in the fall. No one knows what that looks like. We're hoping we don't see it, obviously. Cindy, Zach, and I are here to open a business in tough economic times. That means jobs, business taxes, keeping consumer dollars in Sydney. That's really important. And we think also we anticipate our store we anticipate our store will bring increased traffic to Beacon Avenue, and this will benefit us all. Cannabis was also declared an essential service by the BC government at the start of the pandemic. That's how important it is to people. As mentioned previously, the LCRB has changed the window regulation to allow for clear storefront windows. That is huge. More importantly, we can now provide you with a clear and active window, which we all wanted in the first place. And now I'm going to hand you off over to Cindy. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff. Thank you for your time this evening, and I'm going to echo Brad in shop local, stay local. And it bears repeating, shop local, stay local. And that's what we'd like to do in Sydney. We'd like to allow people to shop locally, stay local, use their dollars in Sydney for a legal licensed product. And I think we all know it's vital that we all get out there again safely, and we want to have everybody open their wallets. And Brad and I actually did that Friday night. We went out with some friends to dinner at Boondocks, and we ended up listening to some really good music, having some really nice dinner, having some good wine. We had some craft beer. We had a bite or two of cheesecake. And at the end of the evening, our table had a very hefty tab, which wasn't good for our pocketbook, but was very good for Sydney. And that's what we want to encourage everyone to do. So, Mr. Mayor, you're quoted as saying that we have an economic downturn that's almost unprecedented, certainly within this generation. I think many people agree with you there. And the economic impacts are going to continue well into 2021, if not beyond. Again, we all agree with you there. And just to reiterate, it's time to shop local. It's time for all of us to shop for local, legal cannabis right here in Sydney. And I want to reiterate that cannabis is not all about getting high. Cannabis is a product that helps many, many, many people suffer with ailments. CBD is a huge seller. And we're imploring people to shop locally, and yet nobody can buy cannabis in Sydney right now. Let me rephrase that. Nobody can buy cannabis legally in Sydney because we all know illegal sales are happening. We want that to stop. Cannabis is grown by Canadians on Canadian soil. It's produced by Canadian growers. It's consumed by Canadians. You can't get more Canadian than BC Bud. It's world renowned. And people who consume cannabis are you and me, our colleagues, our families, our friends. Happy Buddha, as noted by the staff report, thank you, Corey, is fully compliant with federal, provincial, and municipal guidelines and laws. Thankfully, because we all know we had a bit of an issue with the window. We didn't like the window. Nobody liked the window. I can now happily say we really like the window, and we hope you do as well. The LCRB has, as Corey noted, some extremely stringent security requirements. Now with our clear window, we can see directly out and people can see directly in. We are required by the LCRB to not allow cannabis products or accessories or signage for that matter to be displayed in any way where someone looking in the store can see them. We've made sure that won't happen. The stringent security requirements, we've met them. The financial requirements are also very heavy, especially as we've been paying a commercial rent for a year. We've met that. The vetting process is extremely comprehensive, it's long, and it's very involved. We've also met that. And the window, we've spoken briefly about it. Oh my, the window has caused us all a lot of grief. But thankfully, that hurdle has been jumped, so to speak. The LCRB has allowed for clear windows. You wanted active and transparent windows, and we fully appreciated at the time why you wanted them. We wanted them too. Now we're able to give them to you, and the people going by can see what we hope is a beautiful storefront. And we'd really like to encourage you to look in the storefront if you happen to be going by 2410 Beacon, because we have kind of an interesting elephant in there now. We're not sure what we're going to do with him, but he's there. We appreciate that as a town, you have publicly stated that you were going to reach out to us once the LCRB changed their window requirements. We really appreciate that. Thus, we find ourselves here this evening. This time we are fully compliant with everything. We would really like to thank you this evening for your diligence in everything you've done, for your accepting of our being back here this evening under some difficult circumstances. We appreciate that, and we look forward to your comments and feedback. If you have any questions, we will happily answer them. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Brad and Cindy. I will put it out to questions for the applicant from the rest of the committee members. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Cindy and Brad. So you mentioned the use of your products for a wide variety of ailments, and I've heard the same from others. So at your establishment, will you be in a position to sort of recommend to people, different products for different sorts of things?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking that. We have been asked so many times about the effects of CBD and about how it can help people. We're not qualified to give any kind of medical advice, and we're not permitted to. What we are able to do is offer for sale the products that your medical professional has recommended to you. So if you have a doctor, a dentist, a therapist, anyone at all who's recommended a cannabis or CBD product, you can certainly come in our store and we'll be able to sell that to you.
So are you saying that you can fill prescriptions? So if somebody, or,
prescription.
oh, okay. I'm just wondering why a doctor would, like I know a family member who, she gets CBD for her back, and she gets a prescription through Shoppers Drug Mart, and it gets filled that way. So I'm just trying to figure out when they would go to Shoppers Drug Mart, or when they would go to you.
They would go to Shoppers Drug Mart if they prefer to go to Shoppers Drug Mart for their medical cannabis. They would come on in our store if they're looking for something recreational or just CBD that they prefer to buy from us.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? All right. Well, thank you, Cindy and Brad Pendergast, for your time. And I will note that there is a recommendation for the committee.
I'll move the recommendation number 1, that staff be directed to gather the views of residents regarding the proposed Happy Buddha cannabis retail store license and report back to council with the results. 2, that the method used to gather residents' views include the following, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council before consideration. A, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 100 meters, 328 feet of 2410 Beacon Avenue be notified by mail. B, that advertisements be placed in 2 consecutive issues of the Peninsula News Review. C, that signage consistent with Schedule D of Land Use Procedures Bylaw number 1380 be placed in the storefront window of the proposed location for a period of not less than 14 days. And 3, that council provide a special public participation opportunity at the council meeting where the public may speak to the proposed cannabis retail store license.
Second.
Okay. Open for discussion. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just as perhaps a point of order, I know we had you provided committee of the whole opportunity to ask questions of the applicants, but not of the staff report. So I use this opportunity to speak to the staff report, if I may. And so my question through staff, again, with respect to the report and the presentation, the staff report notes that when reviewing an application, one of the items to be considered or referenced in terms of consideration is the impact of the cannabis retailer and that their location within 100 meters of, and it lists a slew of items, for example, childcare facilities, daycares, educational facilities, family-oriented facilities. And so in his report, Mr. Newcomb, you addressed 2 such locations that on a fixed basis you addressed and indicated that staff were satisfied with the separation despite the fact they're within that 100 linear meter measurement. And so my question to staff is, and before that, I'll note that in addition to those fixed locations, obviously Beacon Avenue is home to many community events, be it the market in good times when we're not dealing with COVID, but also parades and community celebrations that, of course, are more difficult to address in a fixed location concept. But to staff, Mr. Newcomb, why do you think it is that the LCRB are making the recommendation that consideration is given to this impact, this 100 meter recommendation? What's your interpretation? Have you had a discussion with LCRB around this particular requirement for consideration?
Through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, I guess the answer is I can't speculate on what the LCRB's reasons are for what they require. My own interpretation of their guidelines is that they consider community input to be the principal metric by which I think approval is gained. And so if council chooses to make comments and recommendations, they want to hear that we've gathered the views of the community and made a decision based on that, essentially. So I guess that throughout this process, that's what has stuck out to me, is that they're looking for community feedback if the application gets to that point. To hear the community feedback. Sorry.
And agreed. The motion before us and community input, I think is an important one. It's one we've talked about previously. I note that we had input from Vancouver, from Island Health, talking about ensuring that the sales of non-medical cannabis should be limited to reduce the unintended exposure by youth and harmful patterns of consumption. I think that's one of the elements. But again, when this goes out for consultation, we'll have the opportunity to hear from the community with respect to those concerns, certainly. The only other item I think that was addressed in not so much the staff report, but perhaps the applicant's presentation, was around the shop local perspective, and clearly all of us are going to concur with that. But I think it's the real case here is about the product that we're shopping for, and I again note Vancouver Island Health have advised in written correspondence that they strongly caution against pursuing economic gain from the legalization of non-medical cannabis use. And so I want us to have that in context as we move forward with the discussion. At this point, I'll leave my comments there, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rintoul, and thank you for catching that point of order. I see Councillor.
Sorry, was that me?
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so you cut out there for a second. Thank you, Madam Chair. So in regards to my understanding, so we're gathering the views. We need to determine the area and the method. So for the most part, I agree with staff recommendations. I just building on Councillor Rintoul's comments about the information from Island Health. I think that's should be an important consideration in our decision-making process. So in terms of what we should be considering, that is definitely something I think we should be looking at. And especially because they state in quite a few places the adverse effects that cannabis has on youth. And so because of that, I think we need to make special effort not to reach out, especially to say parents of youth, so that they have the opportunity to provide input. When we're talking about, I think a very, we're talking about 100 meters and whether people have sight lines within that 100 meters or not. And I think we need to look beyond that. It's not just 100 meters of the people in that area. It's the people that transit through there, families and kids, and as Councillor Rintoul mentioned, the number of family events. So one thing that I would, we'll wait to see how the discussion goes, but I wanted to add to the staff recommendations. First of all, in number 1, I would propose adding to gather the views of Sydney residents as a little bit of an amendment. And then also in number 3, where it says at the council meeting where the public may speak, I would say Sydney residents instead of public. I'm also interested in reaching out especially to parents. And so I would propose to add an amendment that in addition to we're sending out, we're notifying owners and tenants within 100 meters by mail. I would also state that we do the same, that local schools, daycares, and parent advisory committees be notified and invited to share the notice with their parents or members so they can submit their views to the town. Also, so I'll just leave that hanging for now. We'll carry on the discussion. If I hear support for that amendment, we can add that in. In terms of the process, I think it's clear that the court wants us to make a good and reasonable effort to get the views of citizens. And since this is the summer season, I would imagine that we would be waiting until perhaps after the Labor Day weekend to put out the notice and to have the public hearing sometime in late September or early October, in order that our citizens are able to provide their views. And that when we send out the notice, that we indicate that it is the views of Sydney residents that we're looking for, and perhaps that we need to tell them to provide their address, because it seemed in the last process we didn't always get that information, so that would be useful to have as well. I think I'll leave it at that for now and see whether my colleagues have anything else to add. Thank you.
I saw Councillor Garnett. Anyone else? Okay, and then it would be McNeil Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wouldn't support adding just Sydney in there. I think, of course, we all value Sydney residents' views, but I think the North Saanich residents' views are also very important in this. They shop in our community, so I don't think we should be ruling out their input into the decision. So, thank you.
I'm going to go, actually, no. Okay, I'll let the mayor speak, and then, oh, sorry, staff, did you want to speak
just
first?
A quick comment that
Yeah.
when the views are gathered at the end of the process, staff will identify in the staff report, if available, where the residents of the writer of the letter or whatever are located.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
A question through the staff. Is there a reason with regards to the use of the term residents why it isn't views of the public? It seems to me there could be a business owner, there could be an employee, there could be people with interest in the community, and we would certainly accept their views.
Through the chair to Mayor Cliff McNeil Smith, the legislation, the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act and the regulation are specific to gathering the views of residents. I believe that's the language used. So I think maybe inadvertently it's been made a little more specific in the staff recommendation than it should be, given that we will be sending letters to all property owners and occupants. So that will include the commercial property owners and tenants as well, business tenants.
Yeah, to my point, there are commercial property owners and commercial business owners. I saw Councillor Wainwright perhaps wanting to speak to my question, Chair.
Yep, Councillor.
And then I would like to follow. Okay,
so Councillor Wainwright was next anyway, but then Mayor McNeil Smith will follow up after, okay? And then Councillor Fallett, I do see you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So I was going to comment that the court actually directed us to gather the views of residents. So I think using the wording views of residents, you can say views of residents and others if you'd like, but if we say views of residents, it's very clear that we're doing what the court directed us to do. And I think that would be a good thing. And I do agree with my colleagues' comments that we shouldn't be too focused on Sydney residents. I appreciate that we're looking for their views, but business owners live in other municipalities. We've got a lot of employees who work in Sydney who don't live here. And if there's concerns about parents and their kids, a lot of the kids that go to school locally or go to daycares locally have parents that don't live in Sydney. So I think, and certainly for the public participation, we should not limit it to just Sydney residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, did you need to follow up on a...
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright, for expanding on what I wanted to touch on. I just wanted to make it clear for the public. I know council and I know the proponents with their presentation this evening are fully aware that that committee is not considering tonight whether or not to approve or deny the application. What is before us tonight is the process by which we want to collect views, making a recommendation on how we will collect views from residents on this revised cannabis retail application. My comments are really directed mostly to the public. Local governments are required to have a cannabis licensing policy that establishes the process to follow and the considerations to review when responding to the LCRB on cannabis retail applications that the LCRB has forwarded to us. Sydney's cannabis licensing policy, which is included in tonight's council package, includes 12 specific council evaluation and approval guidelines. In the staff report, and indeed Mr. Newcomb this evening, address all 12 of these guidelines with regards to this revised application. My colleagues and I have heard from the public for some time on cannabis retail, going all the way back to at least the last election campaign. However, I want to strongly encourage the public to send us your views on this revised application. And I encourage anyone submitting their views to refer to the information in Happy Buddha's application and the staff report presented this evening. When providing your views, it's helpful if you indicate your interest in Sydney, for example, as a resident, a business owner, or a regular patron of Sydney, as we've touched on. And it's most helpful if you include your reasons for supporting or not supporting this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fallett, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that this evening we have before us this revised submission from the applicants for Happy Buddha. And although there are some comments, and I've got one way or the other regarding the what's in the report, etc., I think really at this point it's time for the public to weigh in on this application, and I'm looking forward to that process, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I just have one question through to staff about the notification radius. When you note that Lulu's is precisely on the 100-meter distance, will they be notified individually, or are they just outside that notification area in terms of your communication strategy?
They will definitely be notified, yes.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, you mentioned a number of amendments you wish to make. Do you wish to move those recommendations, or shall we move on?
I agree with the comments that have been made about us, just Sydney residents. So thank you to colleagues for bringing up those things about business owners or people who may work in Sydney but not live in here. So I think I'm okay with letting those things stand as is. The only thing that I'll move to see if there's an appetite for this, that I would add that local schools, daycares, and parent advisory committees be notified and invited to share the notice with their parents or members so they can submit their views to the town.
I can second that.
All right, discussion upon the amendment.
And I guess, my rationale for that is, as we mentioned earlier, that it is something that does have negative impact on youth, as outlined by Island Health. So I think it's reasonable to reach out specifically to parents of youth to allow them the opportunity to provide input if they wish.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Newcomb first, then Councillor Fallett and Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment that local could be defined any number of ways. Is that within Sydney's boundaries, or?
Since we're, say, within Sydney and North Saanich, because then that would incorporate North Saanich Middle School and Parkland, as well as Kelset and Deep Cove. And as some of the councillors have said, there's kids that, their parents may work here or they may go to daycare here. They go to school in North Saanich, but they come into Sydney for a variety of purposes. So I would identify local as Sydney North Saanich.
Okay. Councillor Follett, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I agree and support, obviously I seconded the amendment. Looking at the Island Health letter and talking about youth and just going back and saying, rather than trying to get someone to quit or amend their habits, it's better to get them to not even start in the first place. So I think it would be good for us to have the feedback of parents in our area. What impact is cannabis having on their kids? Are they using it? Is it an issue? And I also think about our bylaw where we've got the no smoking within whatever the meters are outside of a business and a store and a residence, etc. And how we'd some months back talked about wanting to make Sydney smoke-free and how difficult that was to, how are we going to enforce something like that? And so this isn't about turning the clock back and saying, we're going to repeal the legality of cannabis. Cannabis legal, fair enough. But is there an impact in our community of where the store is located and how it impacts our youth and them being able to access cannabis? And if it's a difference between a store being in one location and another, maybe that's something we need to consider. So I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayor McNeil.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask Councillor or staff to read back that amendment and specifically whether it's an amendment to one of the three points or it's an additional point.
I can read the motion if you like.
Thank you.
That local schools, daycares, and parent advisory groups be notified and invited to share the notice to parents so that they can provide their views to the town.
Okay. The reason for that is I understand school boards have a limitation on the information that they provide to parents. So if this is going to schools, sorry, is it? Okay. But the last part of the resolution is? And parent advisory to be notified and invited to share the notice with parents so that they can provide their views to them. Sorry?
It's to send the copy of the notice to local schools, daycares, and parent advisory groups. Sorry, that local schools, daycares, parent advisory groups be notified and invited to share the notice to parents so that they can provide their views to the town.
Okay. There'll be a school policy as to whether they can do that or not, and I realize the other private locations may very well, so I'll leave it as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll support the motion. Just an observation that I think it's a challenging time, again, to communicate with certain demographics in our community. And this is going to be one of them. It's going to be a challenging time to get this notice, circulated in the manner in which has been requested in the motion that's currently before us. Having said that, I don't support delaying the process at all. I think we want to get that feedback and hopefully through, as the suggestion is made, parent advisory groups to have the opportunity to have at least some feedback from that demographic. So I will support the motion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'll go to Mr. Newcomb again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick reminder that I believe as part of the public consultation on the zoning bylaw amendment for cannabis retail, we did send a letter to the school district. We did not receive a reply to that letter.
Thank you for that piece of information. Councillor O'Keefe, I think I see your hand again against your Zoom background. Go ahead.
Thank you. I guess I wanted to clarify, I wasn't proposing to send this to the school district, via the school district. I was proposing to send this directly to the schools, whether it's the principal, and exactly for that reason, because when you, sometimes it's hard to get information, filtered down to the appropriate place. So that's why what I was proposed, I mentioned to the specific schools rather than the school district. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead again, Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to clarify, in terms of daycares, would that be every daycare within Sydney and North Saanich?
Sure. Yeah, I guess so. We can't really, if we're going that way for the schools. Councillor Duncan would probably have a better idea in terms of how many that would involve. But I guess if that's what our intention is to reach out to those parents, it seems to make sense that we should cover the daycares in both Sydney and North Saanich as well.
Thank you. Well, I could say there's fewer daycares all the time. Do I see any other comments from Mr.? Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry, having heard the resolution, I don't think Sydney North Saanich was specified in the resolution. Is it?
It wasn't specified, but I believe staff asked for clarification with respect to Sydney and North Saanich, and Councillor O'Keefe did say yes to the intent, but.
Would you like me to make that amendment that schools, daycares, and parent advisories in Sydney and North Saanich be notified, etc.?
Does the seconder accept that?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. If there's nobody else putting up their, Councillor, sorry, Mr. Newcomb again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to point out that staff in Sydney do not have a list of all daycares in North Saanich, obviously. We can request that information from the district of North Saanich, and they may be able to provide it. I'm not sure if they can for sure. Short of that, I don't know if phone books are still around, but we'll do our best to compile a list if that's council's direction. And there is a chance we could miss a couple, I guess, is my point.
Thank you. And I see Councillor O'Keefe's hand again, but I'd actually like to, I guess, clarify with Councillor O'Keefe. The way the motion is worded is to notify the daycares and the schools. And so are you hoping for feedback from the daycare providers and the preschool providers on their expectation of how this may harm children? Or are you hoping that they will communicate to their parents on your behalf?
No, I'm just wanting them to provide that information to their parents, and if parents have comments one way or the other, they would respond directly, because I didn't want to impose any burden on schools or daycares or parent advisories to have to be the middleman to gather the views of their parents. So it would be just to, as I said, invited to share the notice with their parents. I worded it as invited, so that it's not requiring them to do anything, but inviting them to do that if they wish.
Okay, thank you.
For the parents to respond directly to the town. In regards to Mr. Newcomb's comment about...
I'm sorry, I had Mr. Newcomb spoke, and then I had Councillor Garnett, but you can... I've lost track of whose follow-up question we are on now. I'm going to let Councillor Garnett speak because he has not spoken for a first time yet, and then we'll return.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to support this amendment. I think we're giving a special public participation opportunity, and I have, as much as I'm not a social media person, I have absolute faith that social media is going to spread this like wildfire. I think parents are going to know, and they're going to provide input. That's my belief. And I think that the number 3 of this will more than cover that base. So thank you. And I don't want to put that much more burden on staff as well. And as Mr. Newcomb mentioned, the ability to find all of these places is extremely difficult. So,
Mr. Newcomb, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, one more time. One thing that hasn't been suggested in here is social media. Council may wish to consider that specifically in the motion.
All right. I had Councillor O'Keefe wanting to finish a thought, and then Councillor Wainwright, you will be speaking for a second time. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
Okay, I was just going to respond in regards to Mr. Newcomb's concern about tracking these places down. And I'm just wondering, as there is a licensing authority for daycares, and so whether the municipality might be able to get a list of those, just as a suggestion. And then I guess in regards to imposing burden and adding this, I think aside from, a little bit more legwork on our part, I think, considering the risks that are involved and the importance of getting the views, I don't see a downside really to going out there and putting a little more effort into hearing from the people who will be affected most by this decision. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wainwright, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm also not going to be supporting this particular amendment, and Councillor Garnett's reasons are basically are what's that I share and why I won't support it. I don't see why we should make staff go through this extra effort, particularly where it's actually looking for information and contacting people outside of Sydney, so that it actually will be a challenge for staff to do it. What is being proposed is in line with what we would do for a major development like Gateway or a Costco, and I can think of a variety of other things in the past that were equally controversial. And by expanding it beyond what we've done for Gateway, et cetera, in the past, it would appear that we're sending a message. There's something really evil that's being proposed. We want to make sure that everybody in the world knows about it, and we strongly encourage you to write us and tell your objections. I'm fine with soliciting input, but I think that what we're doing, which is consistent with our policy, is sufficient. And I do think that the world is going to know about it anyway through social media, and I bet the PNR has a field day covering today's meeting. And I'll leave it at that, but I won't be voting for this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I will take the opportunity to state I will also not be voting for this amendment and concur with what Councillor Garnett and Councillor Wainwright have said. The parents in town would be are definitely going to be willing and happy to provide their input on this application. They are well aware of it. I don't see any reason why a daycare in North Saanich and the preschool and the small children who go there would be at risk from the legal operation of a facility. And I don't know why we would go through the additional steps of notification for a class of substance that I would put within the liquor and is within the liquor and cannabis licensing, but also with vape products, which we did have a store come into town. It did not come to council. It did not need to. And there was not large-scale notifications going out. That's definitely close to some of where we have some family-oriented facilities. And my husband is a high school teacher. He can assure you of the two products in question, one of these shows up in the schools and one of them he does not have as much problem with. So I don't believe we should be making a distinction that we would not be making for any other product that would not be classified in this way. I understand why VIHA has taken the opportunity as a health authority to request municipalities make extra recommendations, because they cannot do that with alcohol. Alcohol has been legal for such a long time. They only have that opportunity when we are going to change something with the status quo. And they took that opportunity when municipalities began talking about open liquor license or open liquor laws in parks, and made similar recommendations, and people took that under consideration. And we can take that under the same consideration, but I don't believe we should take it under much greater consideration than we would have for liquor. And I'll leave it there. Right, I'm the chair. I will call the question. Goodness. Oh, sorry. On the amendments, I will call the question on the amendments. The Sydney ones were removed, so this is just on the amendment for the notification of schools, daycares, and PACs within Sydney and North Saanich. Can I see a show of hands in favor? I see 4 in favor and opposed. The motion carries. Can I see a vote on the main motion? Hands in favor.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Were you closing discussion on the main motion?
I'm sorry. You're right. We've had discussion on the amendment, but not on the main motion. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify with staff under recommendation 2C, where it refers to signage consistent with Schedule D. Is this signage that the town provides, or the applicant is requested to provide and the town approves? What's the nature of 2C, please, through staff?
Through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, the town provides the digital version of the sign that the applicant can then take to the sign fabricator and get made up, and the cost is theirs.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Where there's further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I will call the question this time for real. Show of hands in favor. That's unanimous. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, returning to our main agenda, we have no other business, new business. We do not require a motion to go in camera, so I'll look for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, show of hands. All right. Thank you. Good night.